The crimson swirl of a dying star shadowed by the ebony bones of a skeletal hand. We see it reduced to a battered logo on the hull of a vast spaceship, the Harrow, docking with the space station whose gothic spires look almost medieval, screaming black against the blackness of space. Inside the Harrow, corporate enforcers in armored exosuits, their faces puffy and their eyes white in the orange fluid contained behind their faceplates, march rows of emaciated prisoners towards the yawning airlock. Their cheeks are gaunt, their eyes hollow, their bodies grimed with the grime of their own unwashed bodies. Except for two, whose inexplicably more attractive clothes and faces tell us, but not the nightmare guards, that they're due to be trouble. Director Malric Voss, his face a patchwork of synthetic flesh, cold, glowing optics and thin demonic veins, appears on a screen. His voice is a whisper that cuts like a scalpel. Another cycle, another harvest. Your contracts have come due at Realms Unknown! Welcome to Realms Unknown, a speculative fiction podcast that comes to you weekly, brought to you by the Bugle, where we mortgage our souls to the faceless megacorp that already owns our bodies in order to discuss tropes, news, our favorite old shows, new shows, books, games, and more in science fiction and fantasy. I'm your host, published author and comedian, Alice Fraser, and my companion on this journey, the Roy Batty to my Rick Deckard, the Peter Wayland to my Ellen Ripley, the Wilfred to my Curtis Everett, the Arasaka Corp to my Johnny Silverhand. It's James Colley. Welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me. That was a compelling enough introduction that I actually forgot I was being introduced. I was just kind of enjoying the world you were building.
Every week is another project that I'm never going to complete. I finish every introduction thinking, yeah, I could write that book, and then I don't.
I've only taken a very few attempts at trying to write speculative fiction, and uniformly terrible. And I remember what I thought. I wrote this when I was like 19. I remember thinking, this is such a deep introduction. How brilliant am I? And it was the idea that like the Coca-Cola had patented or had copywritten a certain note that was, and I don't have enough music theory in my head to do this on the run, but let's say it was F. And unfortunately, that the world as a whole operated in D, meaning we could never live in harmony. And that pun was supposed to sustain something like 300 pages of speculative fiction.
Wow, that is genuinely an extraordinary reach for the stars, James. Reach for the stars. You'll never reach them. You're quite short. You can't even get through the atmosphere. And for all of our listeners, a reminder to subscribe to the Bugle channel, and all books and games and shows and movies that we discuss here will be linked in the show notes, and there'll be a link to our affiliate store. Our quick news segment now in sci-fi and fantasy news. Edgar Wright has wrapped the filming of The Running Man, his movie The Running Man, which is based on the 1987 Arnold Schwarzenegger film, which is based on the Stephen King novel. James, are you excited to see Edgar Wright's take on The Running Man?
I'm a big proponent of anything of Schwarzenegger from that era. I also love I'm a big Stephen King fan. I do adore Stephen King. I love reading Stephen King. And I also love when we have worked our way through the major Stephen King. And we're not just like, there was a period there where we're like, let's take every short story. Let's take The Mist, which is about 30 pages, barely a premise that exists in mostly a shopping center. And let's just make that a film. And now we're like, doubling back for like the most prolific author in the world. We're like, all right, well, let's go take another run at some of his works. Let's see it again. Let's just keep making it.
If you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. Apparently, there's sector pictures being released from the reboot of the Odyssey with Zendaya in it. In it. And I think that is like something about that. The rebooting the Odyssey seems so profoundly like next thing we'll be rebooting that cave painting from France of the bison with a spear in it.
I mean, I suppose like Virgil rebooted the Iliad. Like this is what we do. This is maybe the most rebooted text in the canon. I also like what I hope happens here is we're like 5 minutes in and I'm about to reveal my second embarrassing fact about myself. I almost did an honors thesis on the Odyssey's comedic elements because it is a very funny, like, you know, there are the on the nose jokes of like, no one is killing me. Spoilers for a text that has been out for thousands of years. But they're like killing the Cyclops and no one is killing me. But there's also like more subtle scenes of like Telemachus visiting Earth and like Odysseus's old wife of his old friend comes down the stairs and says like, that's Odysseus' son right there. And that's just like, oh, I should have noticed that because, you know, you look just like him. You walked in and you started asking about him immediately. And when I mentioned his name, you cried uncontrollably. So, yeah, I should have really worked out that you were his son. Unfortunately, I ended up getting a job and could never pursue that thesis, but I think it's there.
It's there. I mean, there's that classic fantasy trope in there, which comes out in all sorts of speculative fiction, particularly good in a romance where somebody looks exactly like their parent, has exactly the same eyes as their parent, and or exactly the same birthmark in exactly the same place, which I presume for Odysseus was the birthmark in the shape of an asshole, because that guy, as a protagonist, not a pleasant chap to be around necessarily. Just can't stop being wily.
Like Odysseus, look, we're trying really hard to get home. You badly want to get home. I need you to keep it in your pants for like 2 chapters in a row. And I reckon we're home fresh.
This lady has a lot of pigs. Why don't I bang her? He says to himself. But this is not an Odyssey podcast. Arguably the first speculative fiction. If you don't know The Running Man, let's bring us back to The Running Man, which is the reboot of Odysseus that was most recently done by Arnold Schwarzenegger, where he played Ben Richards, who's a man who's forced to participate in a dystopian reality TV show to pay for his daughter's medical treatment. Of course, the real challenge will be how to make this movie look like a dystopian future rather than a dream plan. Oh, wow, there's a path for me to pay for my daughter's medical treatment. Look, I'm looking forward to the Odyssey with Zendaya. There's something about it that really hits a note in my heart of like, surely we're not back at the Odyssey again. The wheel of time has turned full circle.
That's so funny. The idea that we've actually like we're back at the start now. We have to go from the beginning to remake, you know, everything from now on. We're about to get like the Bruckheimers are going to get their whole hands on Ovid's Metamorphoses, and we're just going to work our way back through everything.
And that brings us to our ad section. Your ad section now, because you can't be what you can't imagine. And this episode of the podcast is brought to you by Vegan Co-op Soylent Green, now with more team spirit. Are you tired of inefficient lunch breaks? Boost productivity with our nutrient-rich office-approved meal replacement. It's people, but distributed. Rest assured that all the people whose bits make up the Soylent Green you eat gave those bits not just willingly but with enthusiastic consent to the proprietary Soylent people harvesting process, and will continue to offer pieces to the company on an ongoing basis. Whether it's skin flakes or small chunks, you can be assured the harvesting process is almost painless and will relieve the donors of a significant amount of personal debt in the process. If you're short of cash, maybe you'd like to join the gig economy and become one of our valued co-op partner flesh donors. Pay in and eat out. Order the Synergy Blend today. That's Soylent Green Vegan Co-op. And this episode of the podcast is brought to you by Burnout Blocker Grussel Pills. Can't afford to sleep? Too busy grindcore hustling through your every waking minute to afford a sleeping minute? Bedtime routine too elaborately optimized to leave time for sleep? Our FDA-ignored stimulants keep you coding, selling, or hustling for 96 hours straight. Burnout Blocker Grind Hustle Pills. Wash them down with half a glass of water. Side effects may include post-cavernous existential dread and post-existential being dead.
I was just hoping perhaps, you know, in such a speculative world, maybe it would be half a glass of dihydrogen monoxide or something along those lines. But, you know, I think it gets to the same space.
Never let me be accused of not committing to the bit. I am so committed to the bit. And this episode of the podcast is brought to you by the door that's a paradox and leads you right back into your office, so you're always at work, even when you're trying to escape from work. And that brings me to James Colley. What have you been into recently? What have you been reading? What have you been absorbing? What have you been gaming? Tell me.
So I start off with the rom-com Ministry of Time, which is a bit of a like speculative Pride and Prejudice is how I would put it. It's basically what you want to get to, and where they get to here is like a couples, like, an out of time, a modern woman with a man from the past, like a Mr. Darcy from the past, how romantic, how gentlemanly he is, how shy. But it's got this wonderful twist in it where you just very slowly and subtly understand that everything that's been done to bring these people together is definitely evil and definitely only can be used by evil means. So like your main character is kind of the handler for this romantic man, and as their love blossoms, it becomes more of a wait, why are you here? Why are we working on this technology? Hang on, are we not allowed to ask questions? Boy, a lot of people are disappearing.
And who's the author of that?
Kaliane Bradley, who I actually did not know, but is I believe this is a huge hit in the UK. So maybe it's that Australia is very late to everything, but I was pretty late to this, and also kind of stood off it because people were enjoying it too much, and that says a lot about me. That I'm like, well, this cannot live up to the hype, and then lived up to the hype, which was a real disappointment for me because I loved it.
It is terrible. You feel like, am I so predictable that I would like what everybody likes?
I'm certain I was a delicate flower.
Yeah, well, you can be a delicate flower that also enjoys the sun that beams upon us all, James.
That's good to know.
No, I'm a night blooming, flesh eating orchid. And I wear eyeliner. Get away from me.
It's particularly bad because this is like on the face of it, just like a quite by the numbers rom-com, like aside from the extra element, like the plot elements going on. So it's as if I felt myself so interesting a person that a simple love story couldn't possibly work on me, an author of a different kind of rom-com with weird elements around it.
That is James Colley's book, The Next Big Thing, which is available here on my bookshelf or in other book places.
But mainly the bookshelf. If you could raid the bookshelf, that would be most useful.
Mainly the bookshelf. You gotta raid my house to get it. I've been reading Max Gladstone's Craft Sequence, which is very fun. The premise is basically that the currency of this world is soul stuff. So all of each coin that you transact with has a piece of soul in it. But in the same way as all worlds that become sufficiently sophisticated, there are corporations and businesses that trade in securities, and eventually, if you accumulate enough power and wealth, you become a god or like a god. And so this world exists after the gods have been destroyed by craftsmen and craftswomen, who are the people who trade in these powers. And it's sort of the fulfillment of a thing that I've said for a very long time, which is that lawyers are the most boring wizards, which is that you write something down and it changes the world. But fundamentally, this is what has happened. These corporations are trading. And so the first book in the sequence, a god has died basically because his account was overdrawn, surprisingly. And it turns out there was sort of corporate malfeasance in the background, and there was all sort of exciting things. And so there's consultants, craft people that are brought in to figure out what went wrong and whether they can patch the god back together, or at least a functioning facsimile of the god, so that it can do things like, make the water run and heal people and so on and so forth. So it's just, and I think there's 6 in the sequence. I am up to about 3. And so far it has just been banger. Each book sort of explores a different historical and cultural background, different gods. So the second book is set in sort of a vaguely Aztec-like city, but modern, as though the Aztec gods had prevailed into the modern times. So it's just an enormous amount of fun. I highly recommend it. Max Gladstone, The Craft Sequence. What else have you been reading, James?
So this is a classic that I had only just gotten to because I was given it as a gift, but Hyperion by Dan Simmons.
I love it.
Such a fun book, so clever, and so remarkable for like a sci-fi book for someone who I enjoy the genre, but I'm read up on a lot of the classics, but a lot of the deeper dives, like I've just kind of sprinkled here and there. And so to have characters where you are, depending on who you're following, you're either in, a holographic knife fight in some distant world between, this like angel of death kind of character and a soldier, or a poet who is transforming himself into a faun to properly recite Keats, and all in the service of a monster who might be moving backwards in time or protecting the time tubes. It's so much fun. It's so like episodic and interesting for that element. Like that, there's a little bit of like a business between each part that's just like, all right, whose turn is it to tell their story next? I don't want to tell my story. You know what? Damn it, I'll do it. And then here's their story, which is fun. Like I'm apt for that. But I really enjoyed it.
That's because it's a gritty reboot of the Canterbury Tales, and so it's dealing with sort of spirituality and time travel, and it's one of those enormously it's really successfully deals with turning your mind inside out, but it is well written enough to bring you along with the discomfort of being like, oh, do I know what's going on? Are they going to, are they going to bring it back together in the end? Is this going to be satisfying given that it's so sort of upsetting to be turned inside out and have your kind of perspective on time? It's like, without spoiling anything, about 3/4 of the way through, it's like you suddenly realized you're standing on the wall.
Yeah, absolutely.
And everything sort of readjusts itself and you have to kind of reassess all of your understanding up until this point. So it is it's a lot of fun. Hyperion.
It reminded me a bit of like the very first time in high school reading Dune and being like, I kind of get what's going on here. And I reckon on my second and third read, I'm going to adore what's going on here.
Yeah. Yeah. And in a world where, you hear about streaming services saying that scripts have to be written to be second screen friendly, which is to say people have to be able to understand what's going on even when they're on their phone. I really enjoy media that pulls you out over the edge of your comfort zone and like holds you over there by your neck until you confess all. That metaphor got away from me.
You were spending too much time with the Shrike. There we go, guys. We've tied it all together.
Tied it all together satisfyingly in a piece of meta narrative that should make you all very upset. And that brings us to Trope on a Rope, which is where each week we discuss one of our favorite or least favorite tropes, something that always we notice when it comes up and we either want a lot more of it or never to see it again. James, do you have a trope on a rope for this week?
So there's this trope that was used particularly this will seem like a deviation, but in the writing of The West Wing. And it's something that Aaron Sorkin used a lot in his writing. And the shorthand for it is the Filbert Report on Liberia. And what it means is a whole way through the episode, you have characters talking to each other about, have you seen the Filbert Report on Liberia? Oh my God, what was said in the Filbert Report of Liberia? Well, he's going to have to respond to the Filbert Report of Liberia. And you never find out until the very last moments what's actually in the Filbert Report of Liberia, because it doesn't matter. It is just a MacGuffin. It is just a thing. And it's so annoying to me when you have to go through when it's just the moment of realization when someone's carrying the very special box that glows green whenever you get it close out into the sun, and you realize you're not going to tell me for 500 damn pages what's in this box, are you? This is going to be the whole reveal, and there is just no way it can live up to. It's the genius of Pulp Fiction is never showing us what's in the case, because what could be in the case that we're like, well, that was worth all the hassle.
There is a very good use of this trope. And I cannot remember the name of the book. So if you're a listener who knows what this book is, in my head, it's The Dark Tower, but that's a separate thing. That's a Stephen King thing. But I think it was a young adult piece of fiction in which a boy is tasked with carrying in his dreams a baby to a tower.
Mm-hmm.
And the baby has its eyes closed. This is in his dreams. He moves into a fantasy landscape and then he moves to when he wakes up, he's in a normal small town. But as he's carrying this baby, he's pretty sure that when it opens its eyes, it will have the same eyes as, I think, maybe his little brother who died or his dad who died, something like that. He keeps imagining it opening its eyes and having these beautiful, soft, gray eyes, I think. And as he goes through this snowy landscape in his dreams, he encounters people from the small town and he fights with them and he kills them. And when he wakes up, he finds that they're in a coma and he starts to feel the people of the town sort of turning against him. And that's quite a sort of a sinister feeling that they're all against him and they're part of some secret organization. And then he gets to the tower, and as he gets to the top of the tower, the baby opens its eyes and they're like these evil green eyes. And it's there's this ancient sort of monstrous figure on a bed who has the same blazing, horrible green eyes. And he realizes that he's basically taking the power source / the soul of this hideous monster back to it to re-empower it. And it's quite a fun moment where you're like, oh, he was the bad guy all along.
Oh, that's fun.
That was a lot of fun. a good use of the mystery box if eyelids are boxes, which they're not.
You have reminded me of another one that I do totally adore, and it is a Stephen King favorite, which is the person who like sits in like usually in a King story on a park bench. They are on a park bench and they are there to mutter religious phrasings and to have something that slowly like the his JFK story is a very good example of this, where you have the yellow card man, which is someone who, as he comes through the time portal or whatever, he's sitting there with a yellow card on his head, except oh it's orange, oh no it's black, oh he's extremely dead. And like it's that great like little marker as you're going through of being like, it's like you may as well have a little sign there being like, we're progressing in the plot if you haven't noticed, which is just so useful whenever you're in a time loop story. Be like, I need to show you that something's changing. So, the card, no, the card.
My trope on a rope for this week is noir detectives or cyberpunk detectives, which is the new noir, getting extraordinary amounts of shit beaten out of them. They are, from page one, getting hurt without a chance to in any way heal or recuperate, just again and again and again and again throughout, getting the shit beaten out of them, to the point where it's sort of vaguely a parody, or it has to be kind of a parody, and particularly in sort of supernatural fantasies where they get the shit beaten out of them and yet manage to power up and increase their abilities throughout. Despite the fact that now, by the end of it, every single one of their bones has been broken. They've lost everyone they've ever cared about. Like, they've had their mind and body broken in every possible way. It sort of seems fundamental to the plots of these kind of books. And I, as a trope on a rope, I do enjoy it if I'm in the mood for it. And that brings me to Convince Me to Read This Book, where you, the listener, can send in a voice note to realmsunknown@thebuglepodcast.com to convince me to read a book, watch a movie, or play a game that you think is particularly good and probably underappreciated. So we have a Convince Me to Read this week. Ped.
Hi, this is Joyce from New York, and I want to persuade you to read the Tiffany Aching books that are sub-series of the Discworld series by Terry Pratchett. You probably heard about Terry Pratchett and about the Discworld books, and you maybe even read some of them. He's very funny and a fantastic writer, and most of the books are really wonderful. And there are a few sub-series that are children's books, and these are. The main character starts at about 11 years old and is very clearly written as an entry point for kids. But even if you're an adult, and I would assume a lot of adults have skipped it for this reason, you will love these books. You know, as somebody who was once an 11-year-old girl, I really related to these books and think that they are just fantastic. Tiffany is a wonderful character. These books are also the books that have the Knack-Mack-Feagle in them. The Knack-Mack-Feagle are Terry Pratchett's send-up of the Smurfs, and they are not to be missed. I laughed out loud on the subway when I read them.
Well, they're also Terry Pratchett's send-up of the Scottish, but, you know, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Yeah, the Tiffany Aching books, I think you have failed in this, in that I have already read them, but if I hadn't read them, I would definitely read them again, or recommend you read them again. There are some people who are looking for books that star 11-year-old protagonists. So if you are looking for that, try Terry Pratchett and the Tiffany Aching series.
This is it. I've only done one Terry Pratchett like children's aimed book, which is The Amazing Maurice, which is like the rodent like rat led thing. And honestly, it's like for a book that is about a rat king as one of its main premises, which is as I was reading this at like 12 or 13, I didn't really know what a rat king was. It wasn't as easy to Google it back then, and that is fantastic news because it is disgusting. But it is weirdly like emotionally affecting and pivot like. There are still parts like I will think at certain times the phrase don't eat the squishy green bit, which is such an innocuous phrase to anyone who has not read these books, but has like such emotional heft at a certain part of this story in a way that only Pratchett can, that he just like will sneak in and tear your heart out and then leave as if you haven't noticed. And I'm so impressed by it, like how much that has stuck with me in the same way that like a lot of my fundamental understanding of economics comes from Night Watch and the other like Grimes books.
Yes, I mean, amazing. But the idea of a monarchy that is controlled by people whose butts have been tangled together inextricably by a combination of bad luck and shit. Um, Look, we haven't tried it yet. All the other systems seem to be failing. Let's give it a shot. Just tie some butts together and see if that works.
Can I throw a interesting like so this is, I don't know what you would call this. It's kind of like social satire kind of in this realm, but for the 1800s, which is a book called Flatland, which is like a social satire of the like class system, the Victorian class system, but your main characters are shapes. And so like they're like 2D shapes, like pentagon and whatever. And so, and because they're 2D shapes, depending on the direction in which they're facing each other, they might mistake each other for different class stratifications and the like. And because it's from that era as well. And it's just, I love reading these kind of, it's like we were talking about before, but like these like speculative books from generations past, like, because so much of my reading growing up, we've discussed this a lot, but it's like Kurt Vonnegut and the post-war kind of speculative fiction is really where like his big warning is, oh, we should probably learn to love each other real quick or this is going to go very bad. And we're like, don't worry, Kurt, we've got a handle on it. It'll be fine. But like, I love any kind of speculative fiction from an era beforehand. It's why I'm so fond of like the Fallout series of games and things of like, what does the 1950s look like as the dystopia? I just love that kind of throwback, throw forward at the same time.
And that brings you to your next ad section. Your ad section now, because you can't be what you can't buy. And this episode of the podcast is brought to you by the Downsize-O-Matic. Streamline your workforce with our AI-powered random layoff generator. Just a Roomba with a semi-automatic machine gun attached to it. It will randomly remove 1 in every 10 employees to balance up your quarterly profit and loss statement and incentivize the rest. It's not personal, it's just algorithmically inevitable. Comes with a free "We're Family" poster for the break room. Which brings us to our subgenre submarine, our deep dive this week into a small, narrow area of although this is a fairly broad area, this is the subgenre of science fiction and fantasy, often science fiction, occasionally fantasy, of evil corporations being integral to the plot or the structure of the world. It is difficult to distinguish it from cyberpunk as a genre, but we'll try. We can start on the comedy end, Mumco from the Futurama, which sort of satirizes the satire of the genre. It's so far out. It's making fun of the people who are making fun of the genre of evil corporation, but it's done very well. In comedy, also, the Goliath and the Toast Marketing Board in the Thursday Next books by Jasper Fforde, which, as a character, this evil corporation has the virtue of being both genuinely funny and genuinely sinister. A difficult combination to pull off, given that comedy is often about making you feel safe, and a sinisterness is about not making you feel safe. Zorg Industries in The Fifth Element verges on satire in the performance that is given, the magnificent performance that is given by Gary Oldman as the face of Zorg Industries. It is also a good entry point into this trope of the evil corporations, fairly common in sci-fi and fantasy. That is where corporations cross over into cosmic spirituality and make deals with the void or with the devil or with the dark powers or with what antimatter or whatever it happens to be, that a corporation ends up making a deal in the name of power with some sort of unheimlich force. And I feel like that is where sci-fi sort of crosses over into fantasy, and often I really enjoy that. There's something about that that's particularly enjoyable, and there's a touch of that in the Max Gladstone books that I recommended, the Craft series. Of course, classic, the Department of Water Power and Power that keeps showing up in Tank Girl, if you're into graphic novels. The Murderbot series by Martha Wells, which is weirdly a comfort read for something that has multiple evil organizations competing with each other in the corporation rim, and Murderbot is sort of gets in their way, and it is a violent, self-hacking cyborg who's searching for the meaning of life. sort of a touch of the Eon Flux there, if you ever encountered Eon Flux. Do you have any favorite evil corporations, James?
I was just thinking of the comedic ones that I adore, because like my go-to is always say like the corporation in Alien and things like that, and it's often like a difficult thing in the genre to separate evil corporations from and get the satire bell ready. The American government, who is often like running along a lot of the same goals, and it's whether you slap like it's basically whether you want your characters to call each other sergeant or not depends on whether it's an evil corporation or it's just the U.S. government doing U.S. government things. But one that I really enjoyed of this that I thought pulled off like the comedic trope so well is Portal, that has that like the video game Portal, which like very simple mechanic, but also like just has that like little comedic like trick, like those little notes that just pull you through the whole game. Like it was the kind of thing that became like, you know, over mean to some degree, and then we forgot how fun it is, and then you go back and revisit and you're like, no, this was funny the first time. It was just people kept saying it to us and it wasn't funny anymore. But like just the idea of like an evil being that the whole way through the game is clearly sinister, but is coaching you through being like, there's going to be cake at the end. Don't worry, just keep doing this. We're going to make you a lovely cake at the end. And then you keep finding bloody scrolls saying the cake is a lie. Like I love any part of that. I like any like research facility. This is particularly video game, but it started to like drift into the streamer world as well, which is like that you find a laser disc, let's say, because you can't just have a book. It has to be a special kind of book, but a hollow disc of some kind that shows you about
Microfiche.
3/4 of the scientists the scientists research just before they have to like look off camera and go like, and it turns out experiment 635 is no, and then disappears. Like that's exactly the kind of like
Why don't more TikTok videos end like that? Bring back the monster coming on screen.
I love it, like all these ones where like the stated goal is so hard to like what this corporation does, short of like the classic like we just wanted to see what would happen if we added this new compound to a monkey. Maybe it's better sunscreen. Maybe it's a killer zombie horde. Who knows? Let's put in the monkey and we'll figure it out from there.
I'm fully committed to this idea of more TikTok and YouTube videos ending with like motion blur and then a splatter of red up on the screen.
One handprint.
And then for some reason, like the monster looming up and turning off the camera.
Has to drop like just one quick like and subscribe.
In gaming world, of course, Vault-Tec in Fallout, which you mentioned before. There's also, if you're talking about the US government, hit by Delia S. Dawson, a large corporation buys the USA and everyone ends up an indentured servant by virtue essentially of having clicked yes on the terms and conditions of various things without reading them. So I'm sure none of us would ever just click through on the terms and conditions and consent to something that we hadn't fully read.
You also like, I think there's an interesting, like aside for this of, I love like books where you have this kind of dystopia arising from very well-meaning people trying to do well-meaning things, or like just like it's a very Vonnegut like cat's cradle kind of trope, but like just the absent-minded kind of scientist, the person who's just like, well, you know what, I'm just going to develop this funny little ice thing. Isn't that an interesting thing to develop? Anyway, let's see what happens with that. It's more of a like a philosophical problem to me than it is a physical one. What's that? The end of the world? That's a shame. Like I like that kind of like it's the Jurassic Park of, you're so busy asking if you could, you didn't ask if you should. Like it's always a fun area for me. By the way, this is like I don't know if it counts. No, it does count. Jurassic Park counts. Fantastic, fun book if you've never done the book version of it. It's a lot more about counting the different dinosaurs in different sectors of the park, but like it's one that I had held off of, but it's good fun.
Severance is also a good example of that, although whether the corporation counts, I guess that does also cross over into sinister spirituality, which, as I mentioned, is maybe one of my favorites. Yeah, any other recommendations, James?
Do you know one that really appeals to me that is worth like, and it's partly because I like when these things aren't afraid to be a touch hokey and a touch cheesy, is So it's very much the remake of Judge Dredd is a real douche rock movie. It's great. It's basically The Raid, but the original Judge Dredd, where you're doing the American corporation, they're like eat recycled food kind of robot going around, the camp like comic book adaptation of Judge Dredd is such a treat for this. And like right on that line of the American corporation is what we're playing with here. And I love it. And I love like how it's both horrifying and silly in the same way like Starship Troopers does this beautifully, where you both embody and parody attacks. And it's not so much a parody in the Judge Dredd case, but like this this hyper extension of everything that America and this corporate environment can become into this world that's both like ultraviolet and extremely goofy, where you can have noodles on Rob Schneider's head and that's also your gag after like 9 people are murdered.
That brings us to the end of this week's episode of Realms Unknown. Action items for this week for you. Go forth, my son, and gather a copy of Hyperion by Dan Simmons, a book which both James and I absolutely loved. For any gamers among you, visit or even revisit James's Evil Corporation themed suggestion of Portal. And if you're looking for some books with an 11-year-old protagonist, why not check out listener Joyce Ketterer's Convince Me recommendation of Terry Pratchett's Discworld series sub-series, the Tiffany Aching books. Please, if you have any book, film, TV, or game recommendations for us and other Realms Unknown listeners, send in a voice note to realmsunknown@thebuglepodcast.com explaining why you like it and why you think I would like it. I would also like to try and introduce my This Is Clearly Coffee section, where I talk about sci-fi and fantasy books where they're clearly drinking coffee, but they refuse to call it coffee. James, do you have a favorite?
I do look, I have like I love this for like Neuromancer feels like you're not allowed to touch Neuromancer. It's the beloved center of this, but fairly constantly throughout. Like I think maybe the most realistic part of the book is that maybe page 2 there's an Australian at the back of a bar just being obnoxiously loud and racist just towards the space trope. But like it is a killer for being like and they had their hyper pancakes and their laser coffee.
If you have a thing that is clearly coffee but not being called coffee, send us in an email to realmsunknown@thebuglepodcast.com. James, Colley, have you got anything to plug?
If you'd like to check out the speculative fiction world of an Australia where the water is running out and small towns are closing down, you can either wait about 6 years or you can check out my rom-com The Next Big Thing, which is available at all good bookstores.
If you want to see me perform live in the Melbourne International Comedy Festival, you can do so for one night only. I'll be appearing on Irrational Fear on the 9th of April. If you go to Irrational Fear, it'll be at the Malthouse Theatre, and I'll be doing some satire, probably about AI or some other topical satire that I'll be doing. That's my only appearance at the Melbourne International Comedy Festival. So if you'd like to come see me there, you can also buy my book, Passion for Passion, online by Googling A Passion for Passion. It's available all over the place. And James's book, The Next Big Thing. You can also come and write with me in Switzerland if you'd like to come write with me in Switzerland on whatever you're working on. I have expressions of interest open at patreon.com/Alice Fraser, as well as my 4 weekly writers meetings. We have 4 writers meetings a week that you can join in on online, and it's a wonderful community of people who are all writing. We get together, we sit and write for an hour, and then we do a workshop where people share their work if they want to and get feedback from me and from the group. That's patreon.com/Alice Fraser. This is a Bugle podcast and Alice Fraser production. Your editor is Ped Hunter. Your executive producer is Chris Skinner. I'll talk to you again next week.